Welcome to the Craft of Coaching podcast, where we dive into what it truly takes to become a skilled, confident life coach. I'm your host, Kate, head of the CLCC, or Certified Life Coach Collective, an ICF-Accredited Level 1 coach training program. We combine courage, coaching, and community to offer you more than just a training program, but a life-changing experience where you use your own personal transformation as the learning ground for supporting your clients. On this podcast, we explore how you can use coaching skills to support your clients or expand your own growth, all grounded in evidence-based coaching practices. Learn more about our program and get free resources for becoming a life coach at teamclcc.com. And now, here's today's episode. It's about time we started talking about the most essential life coaching skills, right? Really, it's kind of beyond time. How are we this many episodes into the Craft of Coaching podcast without defining those? I guess the reason I hadn't gravitated towards talking about that before now is that it's all over the internet. I mean, the International Coaching Federation's ICF core competencies, there's a lot of blog content, but I do want to define that for people. And I think that the value of today, listening to it, is that the discussion of essential life coaching skills might help you to talk about what coaching is, because people do get confused about what coaching is and how it's different than therapy and things like that. So one thing that I want to start off today with is really encouraging everyone to stop saying that coaching is a conversation. And the reason I'd like everyone to stop saying that is because conversations are reciprocal. If I'm hanging out with a friend of mine and we're in the coffee shop and we're having a conversation, she talks, I talk, she asks a question, I answer, I ask her a question, she answers, she relates an anecdote from her life, I relate an anecdote from my life. And is there a back and forth in coaching? Well, of course, but coaching is co-created with a client-centered focus. In coaching, the client's experience, the client's beliefs, the client's embodiment are all the things that are guiding the session. If you were sitting in a coffee shop with me and you wanted to have a reciprocal conversation as friends, and I just keep talking about me, you're not going to feel like we really had a conversation, for one thing. And for another, you're going to kind of go, well, wait a second, where am I in all of this? Okay. Whereas, of course, if you are my coach and I'm the client and I'm talking about me, you're not going to feel like, well, wait a second, where am I in this? Because you know that your role is a different role. So I really encourage you, as you're talking to people about what coaching is and the skills that go into coaching, to please don't just say, well, coaching is a powerful conversation. Nope. Coaching is an intentional environment in which a skilled coach holds space for, celebrates, challenges, asks probing questions, and collaborates with a client to take actions that will forward the client's vision, forward the client's goals, help the client to make changes. And certainly as friends, we support our friends. Certainly at work, sometimes we mentor others, but this is a very specific type of environment and container for that environment that is not just happening randomly at the coffee shop when you're hanging out with your friends. All right, so let's get into essential life coaching skills. And these are all skills that we talk about in the Certified Life Coach Collective, or CLCC program, at teamclcc.com. And they are all incredibly important. I'm going to try to talk about the essential life coach skills from the vantage point of what they are, but also why they're so important. And again, everything I talk about today, may you take this and hopefully have an easier time describing what coaching sessions are intended to do in your day-to-day life. So skill number one, I actually think is very powerful: establishing the session agenda. Okay? Like, a lot of people would start with like the skill of what is your coaching presence? How are you building trust and rapport? Those are coaching skills. They are important. They're essential to any relationship. But I really want to get to the actual skills, as in the things you're doing in the sessions that make it about more than just a conversation. So the first one is establishing the session agenda. Without a clear focus, Sessions meander all over the place. In the CLCC program, we do an exercise that really exemplifies this point where we say, imagine that you're exploring a new city and you're going to take the bus to this park that you really want to go to. And the bus pulls up to the curb and you step onto the bus and you say to the bus driver, is this bus going to the park? And the bus driver just goes, yep, it does. And 5 stops later, the bus driver opens the door and says, we're at the park. And you look around and you realize you have arrived at a park, but it's not the park that you said you wanted to go to. Okay? So here's what can often happen so easily in a coaching session. Coach says, how are you doing today? Client says, well, I've really been struggling with, dealing with my in-laws. I just feel like they're so critical and it's really frustrating because it's like they're just constantly picking on me. And my husband, he says nothing. And then meanwhile, my in-laws just keep coming at me and coming at me and coming at me. And then I start getting more frustrated because my husband isn't saying anything. And then I start to feel like, well, why are they constantly picking on me? I mean, what did I even do with them anyway? And I got to tell you, it's been going. So client starts talking about all this. If you don't establish a clear session focus, you could be halfway through or even at the end of the session before you and the client realize that to you, the work of this session was how does the client start to speak up and have better boundaries with their in-laws and things like that. To your client, the work is, I'm really mad at my partner because he doesn't speak up. And actually what I need some help with is how to communicate with my partner to enable him to support me when I'm, being subject to a barrage of criticism. So there needs to be a session focus. Now, there is a difference between long-term coaching goals and specific session outcomes. When you are initially setting up the coaching agreements with your client, my hope would be that you are asking them questions about what is it you want to get out of coaching, like big picture. After 3 to 6 months of coaching, where would you like your life to be? And then the day-to-day sessions feed into that. Where would you like your life to be 3 months from now is the work you do when you're first having those kickoff sessions. The day-to-day sessions should feed into that. So there is a difference between a long-term coaching goal and specific session outcomes. But for sure, start your sessions with where would you like to be between now and an hour from now? How would I know that we had gotten there? What would be different? What would you understand better? What would be clearer? What would feel resolved? What would we be reframing? Etc. Okay? So skill number 1, establish that session agenda. Skill number 2 that I think is really essential as a coach. Again, I'm focusing on skills you're doing actively inside your sessions. Mirroring. This is a skill that comes from psychotherapy and Carl Rogers. Despite the phrase mirroring, it is not literally repeating word for word what people say. It is pulling key phrases or paraphrasing to deepen awareness. So it's those times when a client, to give that example of a moment ago, my in-laws, they just keep coming at me. And it's like I'm sitting here, my husband says nothing, and they just keep coming at me with that criticism. And I'm getting so frustrated. Like, why are they treating me that way? I mean, they just keep coming at me in this way that I'm just going, how does my husband not speak? So let's imagine that was what your client's telling at you. 3 times I said coming at me. So to mirror in that situation, it would be something like, I keep hearing this phrase, they're coming at me. Tell me a little bit more about what it's like for you to be in a room with people who are, as you put it, coming at you. And that might be like a moment where the client kind of drops a level deeper. They've repeated this phrase several times. There's something going on there where it's feeling really overwhelming. Okay, so mirroring is used for empathy. It's used for insight. It helps clients to hear themselves. It helps them to question assumptions. It helps also for you as a coach to confirm that you're on the right track, because it is also just as possible that, a client might say, it feels like they're coming at me. And then maybe you say something like, I hear you using this phrase. And maybe the client pauses and goes, now that I'm talking about it, it's less of a coming at me and more of a very subtle kind of manipulation that I feel with the way they communicate. That would be important to get clear, right? Pretty early on, rather than getting through an entire session before you realize that there might be a different approach needed, or that maybe the tone of the situation is a little different than intended. It honestly is a hard skill sometimes, but it is one that is worth learning. And one of the things we do in CLCC, by the way, if you're like, how do I learn all these skills? We do what we call skill drills, where we actually break out and isolate a specific skill and we drill it with repetition and giving feedback so that people can get better at these specific skills. Skill 3, asking powerful and varied questions. One of the things I notice with beginner coaches is that they often get stuck in clarifying questions. Clarifying questions are about clarifying information. Oh, so right after your mother-in-law said this, what did you do? So it's a clarifying of what happened. But we also want to ask varied questions. And in CLCC, we talk about different categories of questions. One of them is narrative, which is when you're asking questions about the story or internalized narrative that the client carries. Another question type is somatic, where you're tapping into the body and how the client feels and their somatic awareness. Another type is confronting with kindness, which is a more direct style of questioning, maybe asking, how are you complicit in this particular situation? Where have you not been accountable? And learning how to ask powerful, varied questions also critical because, again, coaching is not just a conversation. If you really want to move your clients forward in terms of action, you can't just keep asking clarifying questions that are about what happened. Each question type serves a different coaching purpose. Next skill, bottom lining and highlighting takeaways. When you bottom line it, you're essentially getting to the bottom line. What's, all this stuff that's swimming around here, what's the bottom line? What's really actually important? And highlighting the takeaways for the client. This is important for integration and forward movement. And it actually, for me, is inspired by Irvin Yalom, Yalom, he's written several books, but The Gift of Therapy is my favorite. He has a practice of exchanging takeaways with clients where he actually would say to the client, here were my takeaways, what were yours? And the client might have completely different takeaways. And that's valuable because it is two people having a shared experience, but not always the same experience. When you bottom line it or you highlight takeaways, that's where you start to take all these amorphous things that are getting discussed in the session and taking it to, okay, bottom line, here's what I'm noticing. Here's what I'm realizing. Here's where action is needed. Here's what I'm learning. And highlighting takeaways is, here are the most valuable components of the session that I'm bringing with me into my life. At some point during the session, you need to be doing some bottom lining and highlighting takeaways so that you and your client have some articulation of what was helpful about the session. Skill number 5, translating coaching into action. This is important because sometimes coaching can become something of a social hour. You want to build that trust and rapport with your clients, but you also need to not just be sort of patting them on the back and going, it's okay, you're a good person. Clients hear that and they benefit from that. Validation is good. I'm not saying to not validate. I'm not discouraging you from validating your clients. I'm encouraging you instead to make sure there is space for your clients to take what is discussed during a session into their real lives, because coaching should ultimately eliminate the client's need for the coach. I know, if we're good at our jobs, we're out of a job. Until our clients grow and encounter new challenges and come back later and say, I want to work together again, which happens and which is fantastic. But at some point, you've got to start translating coaching into action. Now, the ICF actually suggests that you collaborate with your client on practices and action steps to take. I personally feel that one of the benefits of coaching is to have someone thinking outside the box. And so for my personal clients, assuming that they're open to it, of course, I will brainstorm some of my own practices while, of course, also collaborating with them on practices that they want. So when it comes to actually taking action, I see it as I'm a helper who is doing some of the work for the client of thinking of possible ways that the client could stretch or grow or get a little outside their comfort zone. But certainly the client is always going to be in the driver's seat of what practices they ultimately will do. Now, to come back to skill drills. Skill drills are, I mentioned earlier, part of the CLCC process. It's modeled after athletics, just like in sports. In basketball, for instance, there's lots of skills that you need. You need to know how to shoot from different angles on the court. You need to know how to dribble as you run. You need to know how to, I don't know what the movement would actually be called, frankly, but there's this movement I've seen many times where people are surrounding a basketball player, and maybe not surrounding them, but on one side, and the basketball player kind of has a wide stance and is holding the ball and then sort of pivots to their left or their right. Sorry, basketball fans, you're probably screaming at the, podcast speaker at this point going, it's called a this. I don't know what that term is. Nonetheless, the point is, to play a sport, there are multiple skills that an athlete has to have on the field, and usually some are stronger and some are weaker. So one of the things that we do in CLCC is we have practice sessions where you'll run an entire coaching session, and then you start to pull out some of the skills where you go, oh, actually, I could have done a little more of this. I maybe shy away from it, or maybe it's a weaker skill for me. And then we set up skill drills so that you can actually drill that skill over and over. We come up with like case studies and like little mini coaching environments where people can practice that. So that is something that, by the way, if you're considering our program, you would be able to do. Nonetheless, I want to make sure I close today by saying that you need to stay curious and keep practicing. Mastery grows from repetition, from willingness to improve. You can use your coaching notes or session reviews to sharpen your skill set. You can set up skill drills with peers. I consider myself to be someone who, has a very strong coaching skill set, but absolutely, when I look back on sessions with my clients, I see things I could have done differently. And one of the things that I also do is for those coaches who are getting their ICF credential, I offer ICF coaching because I have my ICF credential, and therefore I can offer mentor coaching sessions for people who are getting their credential. And one of the ways I'll often structure that is that we'll do 45 minutes of me coaching you. And then the last 15 minutes of the session, we debrief and we pull out the ICF core competencies, and we actually reflect on, hey, that moment when in the session when you went left or right, what was your thinking? Which of these ICF core competencies did I do the most versus which did I, sometimes back off of or something? And, usually all the ICF core competencies are there, but just some of them tend to be highlighted more than others depending on the flow of the session. So all of that having been said, stay humble, stay curious. Coaching is a craft, and the more you commit to it, the more powerful you will become in helping others to create real change. Always revisit the basics. All right, that's it for today's episode. Thank you so much for listening. Before you go, would you help us out and take a moment to give us a rating in iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you're listening? It really helps us get the word out to other listeners. And before you go today, would you like free resources to support your coaching journey? Whether you're considering becoming a coach or you want advanced coach skills training, access our coaching resource library at teamclcc.com. Again, that's teamclcc.com. Can't wait to connect with you. And again, thanks for listening.